right, hello and welcome to episode 21 of Dano Says So. A little bit longer break between episodes than usual this time, but I'd like to think we're coming back in pretty strong. Most anybody who watches this podcast will recognize today's guest. He first came onto my radar when I was a very, very young man through his work in Minor Threat, then Embrace, Fugazi, the Evens, Coriky. They've all made a mark, and for the last 40 years, he's been involved in the running of first the founding and then the running of Dischord Records, which for a lot of people is the gold standard as far as a large DIY operation goes. So Ian MacKaye, thank you for doing this.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me on your show.
Yeah, it was certainly a pleasure, and I appreciate you making the time. First question might seem a little bit weird, but it has to do with scale. Okay.
Scale?
Yeah, and I'll explain what I mean. You and I actually first met at Maximum Rock and Roll House. So that's one-on-one in a residence, okay? The first time I ever saw you play was somewhere in the Inland Empire. It was maybe a Grange Hall, maybe some sort of a meeting hall.
What band was it?
It was first time Fugazi came out. Chris
you probably saw it was probably the was it the Elms Lodge in Pomona? It
probably was. If it helps you any, Chris Haskett was there.
Yeah, I know that might have been maybe it was a Moose Lodge
Okay.
in Pomona. I remember that night because we did that show. The guy Bill from Toxic Shock put that show on.
Yeah.
And I remember there was a lot of confusion because there was two. I guess in Pomona there's two different Moose Lodges.
Okay.
I want to say Elks Lodge. I can't know if it's Moose. Anyway, it's one of those kind of lodges.
Would it throw a curveball if I told you I think it might have been Eagles? But anyway.
Well, you know what, motherfucker, I can figure this out because it'd be on the Fugazi Live series site. I know we're live, but we're gonna look it up right now. Hold on a second.
All right, fair enough.
We're gonna settle this right now. I don't want to.
No, well, while you're digging it up, let me tell you what I meant by scale. So from that show, right? Then I see you in Z Records. And a few years later, maybe 2 years later, maybe a year later, probably a few years later, I was lucky enough. We shared the stage at the Hollywood Palladium.
Yeah.
Right. A few years after
was that No for an Answer?
No, that was 411. That was 411.
Oh, 411, right? Yeah, I remember that show.
Yeah.
Okay, so
go ahead.
So I was going to tell you, it's at Elks Lodge.
Okay.
In Pomona, and that was the night after the Zed show, by the way.
So I've got them backwards. Yeah.
Right. So the first you were at the Zed show.
I was outside the Zed show. The Zed show was sweating. You know, I knew I was gonna be seeing you the next day. So
no, that Zed show was like 12 people.
That's not the way I remember it. But
wow.
All right.
I remember about the Zed show. Here's what I remember about the Zed show, which was so great that it was so awkward when we played. Big Frank put that show on.
Yeah.
And he's a good dude. And we played the show, and we got there, and they had a little tiny PA, and they had one mic. But there's Guy and me are both
singers, right?
And then one of us just didn't have a mic. There's no backing. Like we had to sing the backup vocals to the air. And there was only about, as I recall, like 15 people there, and they were all just standing there kind of freaked out. Because really the first time I had played a show in LA since Minor Threat.
Right. It could be a false memory on my part. There could be some other reason that I was not inside, and history and the size of Fugazi later may have rejustified it in my mind.
Well, I remember at some point we were like, you're between songs and we're like kind of making small talk. And I said to the crowd, like, so what are you guys buying today?
Right.
There was like a long silence because everyone was, I think people were kind of freaked out to be in there. And then
right.
In the back just said, Oi comps.
Right. Of course.
Then the next night we played the Elks Lodge show in Pomona, and at that show the guy from Bill from Toxic Shock and also the Flip Side people worked on that gig too, and Ink Disease, they were all kind of involved. And that there's two Elks Lodge in Pomona, and whoever made the flyer put the other Elks Lodge address and phone number on the flyer. So the addresses, they're not the right on the flyer. So people would get there and there's nothing going on. If they call the number, the people are like, yeah, there's nothing going on here. It's because it's the other Elks Lodge.
Right.
They're going, oh God. There's also both those shows were miserable for me because I had gotten poison oak or something, or poison ivy a few days earlier in San Francisco. So I was my whole side was covered with a rash.
Well, that's fun.
Yeah. Anyway.
Well, so in this
scale.
let's see how feeble-minded I am before I get to the point of the actual crux of the question. I don't remember that show being. I remember it being well attended, but it wasn't a pack them in and grease them in thing. Yeah. Okay.
I mean, I can tell you, I have 20 people listed for the Zed show, and I have I didn't even write it down. I think it's about 100, maybe 200, 100 people.
That sounds about right. Yeah.
No, it was not a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so anyway, that in a very short period of time, then it's for me as far as being exposed to you guys. It's the Country Club in Reseda. It's the Palladium. And when I was living in Berkeley, I saw you guys in Sproul Plaza, which is to people who don't know, is a massive outdoor courtyard. It was overflowing. There were people packing every balcony. What I wanted to ask you is someone who comes from DIY, do-it-yourself punk rock, cram it into any room you can do, right? And someone who's to my perception, largely message-driven, right? When you start to get into those bigger spaces and those bigger crowds,
mm-hmm.
Do you feel like the delivery was effective? Did you have a preference? And did you feel, to me, it almost seems like the message can seem like a pebble in a very large pond in that setting. I mean, you're the focal point, but with that many people and with that dynamic, do you think people are receiving it as well or digesting it as well?
I would say it's hard. It's a hard thing to measure. I think the point really is that we responded. The idea was to respond to the circumstances as they occurred. Okay. So, for instance, one of the themes of my life really is, it's the weather. Dress accordingly. So it doesn't. So that's just the way I'd approach it. So in the case of, in many ways, I would find a very small show in some ways sometimes more awkward and mm-hmm. maybe harder to get into the kind of communing that I find important for shows. Because people are usually it's the crowd. The crowd are the ones who are freaked out, not the band. Right. I have zero stage fright, so I've never had stage fright. I don't get nervous. I'm very comfortable on stage. But I've been, in Fugazi, we played big shows. People, I think, felt like they felt comfortable because they're in a big crowd. But if we played a small show, occasionally we would do weird, tiny little shows, and I think the crowds were almost. It was not this. It was wrong. It seemed wrong. It just felt the scale for them was wrong. I mean, one of the things that you have to think about is that the crowd is actually the show. Mm-hmm. I mean, the band, if you ever saw the Evens, I used to always start by saying, a show is a collaboration between a band and an audience. And the proof of that is if the audience wasn't there, then the band is just practicing. Right. Right. And if the band is not there, then the audience is having a Quaker meeting, right? Because they're just standing there silently. Right. So that's sort of the, so I see it as a joint effort. So yes, there's a sweet spot for gigs. Okay. Like when you really, there's the band and the audience are really kind of together, but there's something to be said for big audiences that can be really overwhelming. I've been in shows where, you have thousands of people singing. It's pretty elevating,
It is. It's powerful. I agree.
So, but I mean, I think that maybe what has you sort of, what you're asking about is can the message be conveyed? But I think that, is that correct? That the right?
Yeah, essentially. Right. Essentially, when it gets so big, I may have been exposed to some of the wrong big crowds lately, but it just seems like more of a party and less of a religious experience. I don't know. That's kind of corny, but
I would say there's no question that I mean, if you like me, I think if you really cut your teeth on small punk shows, mm-hmm. that's where the new idea can really unfurl. So the new idea for me is when you talk about sort of a religious moment, or for me, I always say it's transcendent. Usually those are really small shows because those mm-hmm. are the new ideas are being presented and you're wow, these people are, it's not, they haven't really, they haven't mastered it yet. So it's so beautiful because it's raw and you feel it. Like that's how I, it's usually with the bigger shows, most big shows, I feel like the bands, they have it dialed in a way that's like it's a performance. I think with Fugazi, like for us, I mean, first off, as you may know, we never use a set list ever, right? That was part of our deal. So for us, every show was a roll of the dice for that night. And really the question was, can we bring it? Can we make something happen tonight? And there are shows like that Sproul Plaza show. It was outdoors. There was a lot of people just walking by. There's a lot of college kids who didn't know us. It was a really different circumstance. But it was also quite beautiful, and it had its own it was a memorable afternoon, I thought. There's other shows I've done small shows where I spend the whole time just dealing with a few brats. And it's just that to me is not memorable. That's tedious.
You're in a smaller crowd, I could see where you're more vulnerable to the occasional rotten egg. Sure.
Yeah. But I think that in terms of conveying the message is the music.
Right.
So sometimes seeing music in a bigger crowd, if you bring it, it can be still transformative for the people in the room. Or maybe there's one person who feels nothing and somebody else who's having a religious experience. I don't know. All I know is here's the way I looked at it. When we played Zed Records, 20 motherfuckers wanted to come see us. And we played Sproul Plaza, 3,000 people wanted to see us. That's what I can tell you. So if 3,000 people want to come see us, I'm not playing Zed Records. If 20 wanted to see us, I'm not playing Sproul Plaza.
I grasped your dress for the weather analogy.
Right. It's a practical thing. Like Amy and Joe and I play in Coriky now, and maybe a few hundred people will come see us, but I don't think, we're failing because we're not playing to 4,000 people. I don't think about that at all. I don't give a fuck about that. What I think is, how many people want to see us? 200? Okay, let me find a room that holds 200 people.
Right.
That's all. Like that's all I ever think about. Is like I just want the room to make sense for the number of people who want to see it. I don't want to turn people away. I also don't want to pay the expenses for a room that I'm not going to generate. I'm not making enough money at the door to cover. So it's always a practical thing. But ultimately, how does it pop off? I don't know. And in terms of like Fugazi's trajectory, I don't know. Like,
it's an interesting thing. This isn't on the notes that I've got up above the computer, but listening to you right now makes me think about something. And the fact that a lot of this occurred in 90 and 91, do you think that sort of meteoric trajectory or unexpected, sort of massive expansion in terms of response to Fugazi maybe actually kind of played a role in the major label feeding frenzy that kind of went on 92 through 94?
Yes.
Yeah. I've never really thought about sort of something that's at one end of the spectrum in terms of extreme DUI inspired sort of the opposite reaction.
But I mean, but wait a minute though. I mean, you have to remember, like, all Sonic Youth, Husker Du, even Nirvana and all those bands, they were DIY bands essentially.
Well, saw Nirvana at Bogarts. I know it. Yeah.
Right. So the point being that was like, it was, what had happened really was starting in the American punk underground. And I really think, and I'm talking about specifically, the punk hardcore thing, DOA and Black Flag and, those bands, the bands, that really went out and hammered. Big Boys played a lot. Husker Du toured like crazy. The bands that really hit the road. Minor Threat, we went out and worked. And I think that, and, then you have all these scenes that were popping up all around. I think that actually created an actual viable underground music scene that was on its own. And in many ways, I often think about it like we carved out, we had like a garden in a valley, and the majors always flew over the valley, not thinking there was anything down in the valley. They didn't see the garden. And then one day, they're like, wait a minute, what the fuck is that?
Right.
And they flew down, and then they go, this is fertile ground. Let's exploit it. Let's rape the land. Right. So they just signed every band that could get signed. I mean, basically any band that could sell 10,000 records or 5,000 records in 1993, 94, 95 would get a record contract. how many friends do you know who got signed to that era? It was crazy, right? And
well, quite a few. There was a point in my life where the Offspring would, open for us in Arizona and things like that. Well, that didn't last long, did it? Yeah.
Right, and I think they play. We play with them too, and I think we played Pennywise.
That's the Palladium show.
No, Pennywise.
Not Pennywise. No, the Offspring was definitely on the
Palladium, right? Yeah. So those shows, so Fugazi that time was we were a much larger band, but so yes, those bands all came through that. But I think at some point the major labels are like, "Yo, that is fertile ground. Let's get down there." And then and then it was a matter of waiting them out, because we knew that as soon as they had exhausted the ground, they go to the next valley. That's all, So I think that I definitely think that not just Fugazi, but all the bands that were touring, there was like this whole underground scene that just had built. It was so strong. But unfortunately, the problem, what I see, the issue really for me, and I'm in a unique position, or Fugazi was in a really unique position, because unlike most of the bands, we had a label. So the other larger bands, they were on other independent labels. And those other independent labels maybe didn't do such a great job. Maybe didn't pay them, for instance, or maybe just didn't treat them that well, And so I think in many ways, the breakdown, like the thing that really kind of sank the American underground at that time, it wasn't the bands being greedy and ambitious. It was the labels being greedy and ineffective or abusive even. That broke down. I think the label system broke down.
Sorry, because what's happening naturally in this conversation is that my notes are trailing right alongside it. My next question after the issue of scale and presenting, going from something so small to something so large, was that by starting in '80, Dischord was around through several sea changes in, this sort of amorphous punk rock world. And I'm wondering, was anything that was going on in that during sort of what they call them the years that punk broke, during, the eruption in digital media, did anything that happened in the last 40 years ever really threaten the sustainability of Dischord?
Not to my knowledge.
It's always been strong.
Just something to do that we want to do. I don't know. It's weird. I don't. It's not. I think probably the secret to our longevity is that we don't think about it like a business.
Right.
We just think it's something to do. Like something we want to do.
There's just, to me, there has to have been remarkable adaptability on you guys' part to roll with the changes, because things are not the same as they were back then. Not in a lot of ways, at least. I mean, I look, for instance, okay, there's Dischord material available on Spotify, right? And from an artist perspective, I think a lot less people buy hard medium, buy records or buy music on hard mediums with that out there. And artists don't get paid shit by Spotify. The royalty rate is garbage. Now, I'm not asking you from a moral standpoint on that. I actually think your bona fides are pretty fucking straight. But what I would say is, do things like that, do the streaming services affect record sales? Or do they drive record sales in your experience?
Well, before you answer that, let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Why did you've written songs, right?
Yeah.
So why did you write your songs? What was the point?
To have people hear them.
Right. So why are we talking about sales and money?
Well, it's an interesting thing, because I'm talking to somebody who, and there's no luck involved. You've busted your ass. But you make your living in a space that I think many of us wish we did or could. It's coulda, shoulda, woulda for a lot of people at this point in life. But it's interesting to stick a thermometer in it and see how the ride has been during certain sea changes.
Well, I guess I feel like in the beginning, we didn't have a clue how to do a record label. We're from Washington, D.C. We didn't know. None of our family come from music. None of them, there's no musicians, no music business people, nothing like that. We were completely, we didn't know what we were doing. We just approached it from a really pragmatic point of view. Like, okay, we'll make, what do we need to make? How do we do this? And then how do we sell it? You know, now I guess there's, you know, I will say that, you know, as a result of maybe the graphics and the music, people were interested. You know, I like to think that we wrote songs that people liked, which is ultimately, like, if you know, I used to say, if you want people to remark upon your music, then write some fucking remarkable music. You know, that's all that's it. You know, like, there's nothing, I don't know what the answer is otherwise. I'm not saying, oh, I've written such remarkable music. I'm merely saying, if that's what your aim is, I just try to write songs that I like. And for some reason, whatever it is, other people, it resonates, which is, I'm grateful for that. But we didn't know what the fuck we were doing, but we also weren't trying to start a business. Like, Jeff and I both had jobs. We didn't actually start paying royalties until probably 5 years in. You know, we didn't, and the bands all knew, like, the agreement was that all the money for the first 3 years, I think, all the money generated by the sales of a record goes into putting out the next record. That's it. There's no one takes money out. Nobody who worked here and nobody in the bands. All the money would go back to the next thing. Now, at some point, we got enough, like, momentum where we actually started to generate enough money where we could start paying people. So at that point, it was really crucial, from our point of view, to pay royalties. I sat last week and sat down for 6 hours and wrote checks to all the band members. Like, that's just my thing, handwriting the checks, because I want to think about everybody who was, like, on the label. Now, that is a crucial part of the way that label operates, but it's a pragmatic thing. So then once we started selling records, and we started making them, you know, we did them by hand, as you probably know. We made, you know, the singles sleeves by hands. And then we got to doing 12-inch stuff, and we started working with, you know, we worked with other people, like the Southern Studios in England, who really taught us a lot about stuff. So we learned a lot along the way. I mean, after a while, I mean, this is 40 years in December, right? So I guess, yeah, we've picked up some experience along the way. But, you know, also, you know, you think about it, 40 years before the beginning of this label, World War II hadn't started, right? So
I get lost in the timeline, and how at one point in my life, it seemed like in the 80s, if somebody was 4 or 5 years older than you, it seemed like an ocean of time. Now, if somebody's 15 years younger than you, it's still an extremely relatable space. Like, I can't believe.
Yeah, but that's because if you think about the way a life is shaped, there's like this, I'm going to use up and down just because it's the way people think, but the beginning of your life, there's this incredible arc of change. Like, your body is growing, your mind is growing. At some point around 18 or 19, you hit a plateau, and that plateau will last for 35 years, you know, and then your body starts changing again. You go into what I call geriatrolescence, right? And it's like, no, I'm 58, I'll be 59 next year. And so your body starts to change again. But that plateau evens everybody out. Like, oh, you're 40 and 25, that's the same thing. You know, it's like it doesn't really, I mean, there's a difference, but it's a lot less of a difference than if you're 15 and 1.
Yeah.
Right. So, right. So,
to make a rather extreme
so
analogy,
right. So, I mean, so I kind of felt, or even if you're, you know, 90 and 75, that's a big difference. You know, there's usually people, right. So I think that if you have to think about life in this sort of the shape, and that's why those gaps seem so different. Right. Anyway, going back to your question about Dischord, I think that we've just tried to be, well, first off, most labels, I think, want to make it a business. Like, they try to expand and they try to grow their business. We never tried to grow our business. We tried to respond to the demand. So when Fugazi was playing and suddenly we were selling hundreds of thousands of records, that was really challenging for us.
I got to imagine. Yeah,
it's hard, and we couldn't have done it without the help of Southern Studios. This guy John Loder in England that we worked with, who was really a genius. He died 15 years ago, but he was just a genius, and he really helped us navigate that. But it had its problems, because if you have, for instance, one band that's selling hundreds of thousands of records, all the other bands who are selling 5,000, 10,000 records, they tend to get lost. Like the distributors all want to work with you. So like, let's say you want to distribute hundreds of thousands of records. Well, you need a distributor who can deal with that kind of number, the size of their operation. But those people do not care about a band that sells 5,000.
Right.
So then those bands get screwed if you start, because then the distributors want like, well, they want to have like some special arrangement if they're going to take on blah, blah, blah. So then we would have to really think a lot about how do you make sure that we're working with people who will at least be respectful of the other releases, because the other releases, though they may sell less numbers, they're as equally important to us as Fugazi titles. But these are things you think about if you're not thinking always about profit, then you actually start thinking about structure. And I've always been interested in structure. Like, how can we make this thing go and last? That's what I've been interested in. And I don't really care. The money stuff is not that interesting to me.
Well, I mean, there's a clear absence of profit motive, which I think is a huge inspiration to people. But it is what led me to ask whether times ever got tough, whether the war chest ever wore thin, you know.
The only time that the very beginning of the label, in the very beginning of the singles, like the way it would work is we'd, send $600 in a tape to a pressing plant, and then they'd send us back 1,000 records, or whatever it was, just a vinyl, and then we had to get the sleeves. Maybe we make the sleeves, but basically we had no credit with these pressing plants at all. So when that money is out, we're broke. So we have to sell the records, and then money from that record comes back and we put out the next record. So then, for example, one of the first really serious dilemmas we ran into, this may be addressing what you're talking about, when Minor Threat did the Out of Step record, number 10, right? We decided, like, well, we knew we were going to sell a lot of records because the singles have been selling so well. So we decided to do an unheard of pressing, 3,500, which is for us insane. And it took scratching. Jeff and I had to put all of our money. We all had to save money to pay for the pressing because it was COD. Like, we can't, we don't have credit with the plant. So to get literally to get the records, we had to pay for them when they were delivered. So once that money was out, then we go out on the road and we ship out. So while that record being pressed, we're getting all these orders, and most of the orders are from distributors, and the distributors buy up almost all of them, right? But they don't pay us immediately. They want terms. So usually it's 30 days to pay us or 45 days, but anyone who's ever dealt with a distributor knows that they could just dick you along for months. So
I've been there. Yeah.
Right. So so all the records go out the door, but you have no money for it. So now we're trying to get the money back from the distributor so we can pay to do the next record. Now, here's the dilemma. The record was sold out. The whole pressing sold out before we got the records back, right?
Okay.
So there's a huge demand for more. So the money we make back, does that money go for the repressing of the Minor Threat record? Or does it go for Subject to Change, Faith, number 11? Which those guys are waiting. They've done the tape. They're waiting to put it out. So does it make sense for us to put out that record with the money we get back? Or do we put the money into a repress? We know the repressing will sell. That was a dilemma. We would run into those kind of problems.
It's interesting to hear you say that. There's a universal crises of the early punk labels, because I dealt with that a little bit in the small label that I did for a brief period of time. But I remember Revelation Records, when I was on their label, they would have problems with releases stacking up and waiting to recoup on one to make the next one possible. And as an artist, it was extremely frustrating. But it was, they made it.
As a label, for a label, it was frustrating. And it's one of the things that really has driven me crazy because I think people can't imagine how broke we were. So when they look back at the history of the label, they're like, well, why didn't you guys put this record out? I can't believe you didn't put that record out. It's like, we had no money. Like, for instance, Government Issue, Boycott Stab, that record, like, I recorded it. It would have been on Dischord. We literally didn't have the money to do it. That was 10. I think we did it was a 10 3/4 or something, right? It was like we did with Fountain of Youth. And that's because Derek Shue from Fountain of Youth, another local label, says, I can put the money up for that.
I always wondered about that. GI, and in particular, Stab, though I was lucky enough to get to know a little bit towards the end of his life, was kind of a really pivotal, really influential figure for me. And it always struck me as odd when you started getting to the LPs and the Dischord was gone, you know?
Yeah, but I think those guys, they were on a mission. Like, yeah. I think that Boycott Stab should have been on Dischord, and it is now. Like, we got it, we put out the complete sessions because we recorded tons of songs. But I think that then they were thinking like, hey, they went to Giant or whatever. They did that thing, and then it's just they're on a different trajectory. Most people, I think bands are ambitious.
I was thinking more along the Joyride, Fun Just Never Ends period, but sort of pre-Giant, but yeah.
Yeah, they may well have been, but I think that the Fountain of Youth, and when that happened, I don't know. It just, I think we just sort of became parallel tracks. And they were those guys they were huge here, GI, and they were touring, they were doing great. I think they were quite happy with their arrangement. And Dischord, it's funny, over the years, there have been many bands who said, like, you guys just don't do enough promotion. They're coming at it from a more traditional record. I don't know, like, we never made videos or any of that kind of crap. And but my feeling was always like the label is the promotion, and just go play shows and write good songs and go do your work, and we'll put out the records. But I think for a lot of bands, they really like, we want a different kind of support, and said, good, then you want to be on a different label.
Right? Live and let live, sure.
Right, which is fine. I don't have any issue with that. I think mostly, I just don't want people to be unhappy with Dischord. I mean, there have been labels who really strong-armed us, or bands who really strong-armed us and wanted us to do things that just, on principle, I'm just not going to do.
You and I are sort of beating up on the time windows that we've sort of mutually set for ourselves in this thing. There is, in other words, we're going a little bit long for what we kind of talked about. I appreciate the conversation, but there's something I wanted to ask you about. I was looking at pictures the other day of Fugazi playing Lafayette Park, right?
Which one?
Lafayette Park.
Yeah.
Right? Then I was thinking about what's gone on in Lafayette Park this year.
Yeah.
And the fact that you're there, you're in DC. It would be a missed opportunity for me not to ask you what this year has been like so close to the nation's capital. I mean, it looks hopefully unlike anything we'll ever see again. But has it brought you down? Has it been motivating? Has it been horrifying?
This DC, if you live here, you kind of, yes, of course, it's in, I think of the U.S. government as a giant business.
Okay.
Like, you live near LA, right? Hollywood is a business.
I would say showbiz. Yeah.
That's a business. And what is their fundamental primary interest? Making money, like power and money. Here, that business is called the federal government. And their primary mission, each one of the people who work in that world, they are interested in making money and power. That's what they're about. And so the person in charge, like, first off, you have to be an asshole to even be a congressperson. Like, like a rep. You have to be a bigger asshole to be a senator. And you have to be a fucking giant asshole to be a president, right? Because you have to really think, like, I want to be, it's like, I want to be there. I don't care by any means necessary. I'm going to do that. I'm not saying they're bad human beings. I'm just saying that they're kind of assholes. And, and so the current occupant, it is a little startling because I'm so used to a certain kind of power-tripped person.
Yeah, no, he gives a fuck about decorum.
Right. This guy, but I'm saying, like, I have to say, like, with the exception of maybe Jimmy Carter.
Okay.
Like, I don't think of any of the presidents really has ever shown like a sense of empathy. Like, Jimmy Carter said, wear a sweater.
Right.
I love that guy.
He's
such a bad rep.
I was going to say, his framing in history, he's aging well.
Yeah. But if you go back and look at some of his shit, and your mind will be blown.
Well, all you have to do is get into foreign policy, and any romanticism you have about any American president starts to take a really serious beating.
Right. So anyway, so the point being, yes, the current CEO of that company,
okay,
he's fucking nuts, and it's insane to actually. It's be like though if you had like a giant. If you're in Detroit and the guy who takes over GM suddenly is like, only making exploding cars. You're like, what the fuck is this guy thinking, right?
Sure.
Like cars where the steering wheels snap off, and you can't figure out, why would he bring in the staff to design cars where the steering wheels snap off?
Right.
I can't understand it. I don't understand the decision, other than to think that while the steering wheels are snapping off all these cars, they're just pilfering and robbing everything around us. That's what I think. So I feel like that's what these guys have been doing all along, just sowing crazy chaos. So for me, it's just a matter of patience. Like, we'll wait them out. That's the good thing about human beings, is they die. So, and it's just a matter of time.
Here's my tagline for the interview. The good thing about human beings is they die.
They die, right. I mean, every despot is dead, right? In the history of the world.
Yeah.
Every despot, if he's either, and it's almost always a he, but every despot we've known about from the past is no longer with us.
Right.
Right. So I would say it's been, I'm pretty like, I work with what's in front of me. So yes, like in terms of, I've seen a lot of people, I know a lot of people who have lost their businesses. It's sad, it's a pandemic, and we're not used to that. We're not used to that reality. The racial situation, what's going on, and that is not new. It's certainly nothing new. It's pretty enthralling, like to see people step out and step up. I like that. I'm not into rioting.
Right.
I find it, I understand on some levels, I understand it. But I think there are also a lot of people who are, well, first of all, I think there are people who are opportunists who just make it a headache for everybody else. But even, I think, more pernicious I actually think are people who are coming from the other side.
Yeah.
Who are actually, I don't know, years ago, I think it was the Republican National Convention in Miami, and maybe it was in 2000. I can't remember, maybe it was 2004. Anyway, I don't know. Anyway, do you remember the Black Bloc, those people? It was like the precursor to Antifa.
Yeah, no, and I remember I was exposed to them a lot more in Germany.
All right, so those people, so that was what was happening at the time. And there was this I remember seeing this footage where there was, helicopter footage, and then you could see all these people. There was like a fenced, like a big police fence, and there's police on one side, and then the camera would go over and you'd see all the Black Bloc people, like all these people dressed in black with the balaclavas and that kind of stuff. But at one point, the camera swung back to the secure area, and we see the police and the vehicles, and there's just a bunch of like empty streets, and there's like police back there like eating and whatever, resting. And there's a bunch of guys dressed as Black Bloc.
They're with the police.
Yeah, because they are part of, like, this is nothing new. This is COINTELPRO,
back to the Black Panthers. Infiltration is
right, exactly. So
age-old thing.
So my thing, I guess I always feel like, well, you got to try to keep the cops bored the best you can, because otherwise you just end up spending all your time fighting them. And I just, so I think that, but we went down, during the Black Lives Matter stuff. It was pretty incredible. The energy was pretty inspiring.
I wondered about that because, it was on my screen nightly, and it was popping off in Long Beach here, which is, 20 minutes from me. But I thought about that. For me, I'm a punk rock kid. I equate DC with Dischord and with my own experiences there. And then I'm seeing, during the George Floyd era and sort of the militarization of the police right there in front of the Capitol. And I was just thinking, I wonder how this lands with these guys. And I wonder how many people I would recognize are down there at any given point,
Well, I don't know. A lot of the DC original people don't live here anymore. But, most people I know went down there. Yeah. I think my brother and his family went down there, and Joe Lally was down there, and we all went down. It's just, you got to be there, go down and make the scene. The militarization thing, that's just to me, that's just a manifestation of a deep sickness in this culture, but it's just the gear was made and they got to sell it to somebody,
right.
it's,
No, I started writing material about it back during Ferguson, when they were rolling gas tanks and so forth out. I was horrified.
Yeah.
Listen, I thoroughly enjoyed doing this. You were very patient in us chasing each other around to get a date organized. I appreciated that.
No problem. Does it make any sense, this interview? Is this the kind of interview you want to do?
It's long, sir. For all of our talk about 30 minutes, we went right past it. Which leads me to think that if you don't end up swearing off podcasts entirely just because of their exhausting nature, I will probably bug you again sometime down the road when the subject matter presents itself.
What were your subjects we didn't cover?
No, we hit everything. One thing I thought about is the amount of responsibility that I perceive coming with Dischord and the sheer volume of work that I imagine goes with it. Has it ever affected your love for this? I mean, it seems to me it would be a different energy than it was as a teenager or I think when most of us first got into punk rock, the music came first, and there were very few mechanisms or mechanics behind it, like very few physical responsibilities, very little actual work besides the road work itself and the songwriting and everything else. Well, you've been surrounded by boxes of records for 4 decades now.
Yeah.
Still love it?
Yeah, but I'm also, yes, absolutely. But I've worked with so many people have worked for Dischord.
Yeah.
It's different. Like, I'm at Dischord House by myself, really.
Mm-hmm.
For years, I'm in this little tiny office, 3 people would be working in here.
Right.
And it was really you spent a lot of time with people, which I loved. And this house was like constantly people were just coming and going at all times.
Mm-hmm.
So it's different now. Like, now I'm largely sort of here on my own, especially now with the pandemic stuff.
Right.
Usually in the summer, people are showing up all the time to take pictures on the porch or whatever, that kind of thing.
I've always thought that would drive me batshit. You appear to be quite gracious about that, but
I'm pretty easygoing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just here. So I feel like I recognize that my life is unusual.
Mm-hmm.
I've always owned my own time, really. And I couldn't have done it without the generous and consistent support of the bands and the people in the bands and the people who work with me. So I feel like I have an obligation to them.
I mean, I was very careful not to say the founder or solo founder or sole founder, and
right.
not use operator, to try and not use deifying terms, because I'm keenly aware that there's a cast.
Yeah, totally. And it's long. And also, it's true that, we've been around for 40 years, but I think of in the 40 years, I think I have 3 or 4 people who worked with me for over 2 decades. That's a long time, and they've all, and they're still friends. I love everybody, it's all good. There's a few people who, over the years that, worked here very briefly, who I don't know them anymore. But by and large, people who work here, I know them. They're all people who are like part of the action. They're part of the family.
One of the funnest thing about doing these Zoomcasts is that I've been able to reach back to people that I was one time close to and that I was affiliated with, be it through Maximum Rock and Roll or be it through, my own record label and things like that. So I get that. I'm hearing a certain romance about all of this in your voice, and I can relate.
Yeah, I'm not, to be clear, I'm not nostalgic.
Okay.
I'm not sentimental. So I got,
though you're known as a massive archivist.
Yeah, that's not about sentimentality, though.
Okay.
That's about, if you have the stuff, take the fuck care of it, right? Like, the way I look at it is like, what the American punk scene created was something that was done in spite of the mass media. And because of what we created was so under the radar, the powers that actually control music and thus music history are not going to talk about us. Like, that history is not going to be recorded by the Grammys. Now, they'll talk about Nirvana.
Right.
They're going to talk about Nirvana. They're going to talk about these things. But really, the scene that we were a part of, there were kids who created their own bands, their own records, their own fanzines, put on their own shows, created a touring network, took care of each other. Like, you know, people, you know, like you and I both know people all over the country. You know, like, you know, I saw you talk to Pete Kramiak. You know, Pete Kramiak was a kid from Rhode Island who came down here. You know, I saw you talking to Kevin Seconds. Kevin and I just started writing letters to each other, you know, because we just had heard about each other's music. I mean, when I, you know, this is all made, this is real time. These were people completely, it was not about making it money or making it musically. It was just about making something that we could be a part of. And I think it was a hugely important chapter in cultural history, but one that will largely will be invisible because of the way it's just the way the civilizations are recorded. You know, Rome, you always hear about Rome and their fucking shit, but you're not going to hear about what's, you know, like even like the Inca, you know, like you're not going to hear about them so much, right? So I feel like my situation is peculiar. I'm 58 years old. I've lived in 3 houses my entire life. My father still lives in the first one the one I grew up in, and I own the other 2. So I didn't have to throw shit away. I still have it. And,
an interesting observation, because I've been stripped down to the bolts a few times.
Right, not me. I have, you know, I'm at Dischord House. I lived in this house for 21 years. So I have things, like I'm the person who can look around this room and tell you what everything is. It's also the way my brain works. And it suddenly occurred to me, like, well, why did I keep this stuff? Because I'm not a hoarder. Like I don't like, oh, more for me. But why did I keep it? Well, I kept it because it was something that was important to me and I think to other people, and I want to make it available in a way. So then I thought, all right, I have all this stuff. I'm going to die at some point. So when I die, who's going to deal with this? Well, in theory, Amy, my wife, my partner, right? That's not fair to her. Here's a bunch of boxes. Good luck. So I'm fucking organizing it. Get it organized. And then figure out where it can go. So I've been working at the University of Maryland. You know, I have thousands of fanzines. You know, I worked, you know, they've helped us. They're scanning all the fanzines, that collection, like that's organized. I organized 35 years of punk correspondence. I probably have a fucking letter from you in there.
I would imagine so. Yeah.
Right. So I kept it all. Well, not all, but I kept a lot of it. So that is actually here's a thought. I think the American punk scene may well be the last youth movement in America, at least, that used paper to correspond with.
I think you're absolutely right.
It doesn't exist anymore, right? People don't write letters the same way. I'm not nostalgic for it, but it was fucking important.
Yeah, agreed.
So my work is like, I don't look at it, oh, this is so great, I wish things were like that. I don't. I wish things were like what they are right the fuck now.
It doesn't reek of it doesn't reek of any narcissistic motivation. It comes off more as a sense of responsibility. And in that, I think I understand it even better now, having talked to you about it.
Right. I would say it's certainly not narcissistic. I don't sell stuff.
Right.
Like, it's not about me. On the other hand, like people, you know, I've been typing up my journals, right?
Right.
Actually, I think I met you, Max Rock and Roll, is at 87 or 86 or 87?
86, I think.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I have.
We learned through the Zed Records story that my memory is shit by comparison to yours. So whatever year you say it is.
I'm pretty sure. I was thinking about like, oh, look, I think right after you contacted me about doing the interview, I was typing in my journal and I was like, oh, look, like I meet you at Maximum. And and people say, well, why are you typing up your journals? Are you writing a book? No, I'm not writing a book. That's not why I'm doing it. And they're like, then why are you doing this? I said, for this very fucking moment, to talk to you, like to have a reason to call you and say, like, hey, I just Like, well, look what I just typed up. And then yeah, that to me, I feel like so much of the discourse in the world now, or at least the world that I exist in, is dominated by the trauma that people are experiencing largely through their relationship with social media. And I find that conversation just maybe a little south of weather as being boring and predictable and pointless. Like, I feel like if you don't, like, of course there's, I mean, I don't know why punks are surprised that the government sucks. We knew that from day one, right?
I have a counterpoint to one thing that you're saying, though, and it's an old fart counterpoint, but it has to do with social media. All right, and that is, by and large, one of the great things about having been, into punk rock in the early '80s and mid '80s and everything else, right, was that it was so small, it was so immediate. Even though we weren't cellular, we were all mostly pen pals or calling people on landlines. There was a lot of direct communication, and the networking was fantastic, right? Yet somehow, in all of my decades in this music, I'd never crossed paths with Vic Bondi. Okay?
Yeah.
And he was someone I admired and someone whose work impressed me. Well, he reached out to me on the social networks in response to some of my political posts.
Did I say something about social media about I said
well,
the toxic? I said, hold on a second. You're seizing upon, like, you think that I'm saying social media is bad. I'm saying that the discourse is largely surrounding the trauma they've experienced via social media. So it's a relation. It's a different thing. I don't have any, look, I'm fucking talking to you right now on a form of social media, right? So we've already established it's a miracle. And I'm glad that you were able to find Vic that way. You probably could have called him on a phone. I had his number. I could give you his number, but I understand. I use email. It's not like I'm not against. For me, this problem with social media, or I should say specifically having a device in your pocket that dings every time somebody puts bad news on there.
It's a leash.
Right. And then you think about the people who are doing that. That is their job. Their job is to get you to look at the screen. So they're not going to put down good news. Usually it's like they want you to keep looking. Like, I was listening to they're doing a fundraiser for the local public radio, and they're just saying, can you imagine only being able to get the news, in the morning and the evening? Can you imagine not being able to get the crucial information you need to know? Why the fuck do you need to know something at 2 p.m. that happened in fucking Seattle or in Peru, or what difference would it make if it was at 5 o'clock versus 2? It makes no fucking difference. That is actually a conceit on their part, and I think is a way to make you feel like that you're missing something. Not you. One is feeling missing something. And I think that relationship is unhealthy. And I think that when people I know who are really struggling psychologically, I think I would say almost every one of those people, maybe everyone, is traumatized by their relationship with social media.
It's an interesting observation, and I heard you say that on another podcast and was kind of fascinated by the observation. I think where you and I just butted heads here is I see Zoom or even cell phones as technology and the networks as an entity and an animal unto themselves, which it's sort of show and tell culture. But
Rob, I'm just saying, to me, I see them both as mediums that are unusual.
Okay.
The Zoom is a more passive media, right? At the moment, because it's not coming to you.
Right.
It's the notifications that is the problem. Like, I look at the New York Times.
I'm inclined to agree with you.
It's the New York. I look at NewYorkTimes.com on my computer, and I'll look through it. There's an article, I might read it. I would not have New York Times sending me information all day long. Why do I need to know, what the results and fucking the voting results in Wisconsin are a month after the election when I'm taking a shower. I don't fucking need to know that. I can find out later on. But I think the misery, because I think people are terrified, and I'm not. I'm not terrified. Yeah, do things suck? Yes. And then, you know what? Things have always sucked. Do you remember back in the bad old days when the skinhead thing was so crazy?
Absolutely.
And there was like these white power skin guys all over the country. Do you remember that?
Oh, they closed both of my eyes at the Olympic Auditorium.
Right. Okay. Those people, like, I remember people were saying, like, we got to fight these guys. We got to there's some people who had this philosophy, like, we got to fight them, fight fire with fire. We got to beat them down. My philosophy was learn their first names and just realize they're just people. They're unpleasant people, but if we kill them, it's not like we've rid the world of assholes. Assholes are a virus, and that virus just floats around. It's always somewhere, right? It's always somewhere, the virus. So obviously, if they're hurting people, we got to stop them. But the idea that we have to we would be able to eradicate all of assholedom by beating up these 5 or 8 or 12 or 24 dudes at some show is ridiculous. Ultimately, there's always bad news in the world. Always. There's always has been. The human ability and propensity to be brutal and violent and do this horribleness, I don't understand it. I can't relate to it, but it clearly exists. And for all this shit that goes on here, like, think what's going on in Ethiopia right now. That is fucked up. It makes what goes on here nothing, right? So I feel like people, there's no point being terrified. There's no point in it. Because if you're terrified, then you're tight and you can't do anything. I think that people should be aware and compassionate, and they should work hard for things. They should, if they see something they think they can lend a hand, lend a fucking hand. But don't sit in your house and just be like, the world sucks, I'm terrified, and everything's fucked up. Because everything is not fucked up. Most things are not fucked up. Most things in this life are beautiful.
Well, forgive me, but that is a perfect exit point. So I'm going to get the hell out of here.
All right.
Ian, this was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yeah, turn your recorder off. I'm going to see if I can find my Maximum Rock and Roll thing for you.
Will do.